Hey everyone, it's Andy from the First Strike podcast, and I'm going to talk to you about five-color humans in Modern, and in particular, what Militia Bugler means to the archetype going forward. And I'm also going to talk about some key discussion topics that people have been having on humans recently. So first, I just want to let you know that every Tuesday night we record the First Strike podcast live over on YouTube. You can come in and join the chat where you can comment or ask any questions, and we could even answer them live on air, and they'll make their way into the podcast. And every Wednesday is when the podcast is uploaded to magic.facetofacegames.com. So first, I've been playing humans for a few months now, and the reason I've been playing it is because it does all the things that I think you want to do in Modern. It's very fast, it's very disruptive, and it's very resilient. All the makings of a great Modern deck. And so I had a PPTQ coming up, and I had to decide on what list I was going to be running for the PPTQ. So I went through MTG Goldfish, started looking at a lot of lists, and I noticed that all these lists have been playing between 2 and 4 Militia Buglers in it. So at first I had some reservations about it because I had personally never played with the card before, and a lot of the cards in the deck are sort of sacred cows. The stock list is 58 cards plus 2 flex slots, and I was surprised to see people providing even more Militia Buglers into the deck, going beyond the flex slots. But when I got to the PPTQ, I noticed right away that this card is exactly what the archetype wanted. It provided you good advantage, it helped you find your really good cards, and it just smoothed out all your draws to help you curve out longer into the game than you ever could before. And so I ended up winning the PPTQ with humans, not taking a single loss in the entire event, playing a wide range of archetypes, and even beating up on some archetypes that I had previously thought are very bad matchups for the deck, but now I don't think they're that bad. So, if I told you that there was a card you could put in your deck that makes your bad matchups better and doesn't make your good matchups any worse, you would tell me that that card sounds too good to be true, should obviously be a 4 of in the deck. Well, from my opinion, that's what Militia Bugler does to the archetype. It does that, it makes your sideboard better, and what it does it provides you advantage to help you play longer games when you're already so favored in short games. So let's go into more detail about how it makes your bad matchups better. So, against any of your bad matchups, there was two kind of decks that really beat you up. The first was the decks that operate on a totally different axis than humans do. Those are the Trons, the Ponzas, and the Dredge. And honestly, I don't think those matchups are entirely fixable outside of Tron. So I don't really focus on trying to help make those matchups any better. But the second type of matchup that is really good against humans was the decks with a lot of removal and a lot of two for ones. The Jeskai, the Mardu, the Juns of the world. And what this card does is it makes those matchups infinitely better by providing you with some card advantage. And when you're ahead, you can compound your advantage by, for example, finding a Thalia Guardian of Thraben, making it harder for them to catch up. Finding a Phantasmal Image so you never run out of threats. Finding a Freebooter to take that key spell. A Metal Image to start restricting their outs. All this is from one card that just draws you another card, and you may think that it's just another body, but Humans is a deck full of bodies, and another body is very important to the deck. And so, how does it not make any of your good matchups any worse? It's a slow card, right? And all your good matchups are not decks where you really care about being that slow. So, what I think is most important is the decks that are your good matchups tend to be ones where Meddling Mages lights out, Freebooters lights out, and Thalia's lights out. And what Militia Bugler does is it lets you find those cards more often, albeit in a slower manner, but when it comes to a Freebooter and Meddling Mage, it doesn't honestly matter that much when you find them, as long as the game isn't quite over yet. So it helps make Storm matchup better, it helps make KCI better, any of the decks that you were previously preying on, it doesn't hurt those matchups. If anything, it could make them even better, but it doesn't make them better enough that I think it's the key talking point of why Militia Bugler should be a 4 of in the deck. What it does do though is it helps your sideboards cards, and in the format of Modern, that's very important because sideboard cards are often the key to why decks are successful. What it does is it lets you find these sideboard cards more often, and if you notice the sideboard that I have here, all of these cards are cards that don't need to be played on turn 2 to have a huge effect on the game. For example, Auriok Champion played on turn 4 or turn 3 against Burn or against Hollow One is still going to be good enough rather than having to have to play it on turn 2. Kataki is going to be game breaking almost any turn it's played against Affinity, and it's going to be game breaking almost any turn it's played against KCI. Reclamation Sage is a card you're often just trying to dig for. You're trying to find it. You don't necessarily want to curve out with this card because it's not a human. It doesn't help you attack that well either. So it fits really well with Militia Bugler there. Reflector Mage, what it does with Reflector Mage is it's not that powerful, but in matchups where you want creatures and you want to gain board advantage, some tempo, Militia Bugler is certainly not going to net you negative tempo when it finds you a card Reflector Mage. So I think that's an important thing. And it's also important in some matchups to have access to all 4 Reflector Mages. And now Sin Collector. So Sin Collector is one that it doesn't matter what turn you play it, it's almost always going to 2-for-1 your opponent unless it's their last spell. And then at that point, they've run out of spells, so you can start taking over the game because your top decks are better. You only run 19 lands, 4 of them cycle. I know you have 4 Aether Vials, but it just helps you take advantage in the early game. So it's just one of those, you live it with it, you die with it. And what it helps also is its Staticaster. It's a card that I don't love in a lot of matchups. I understand when it's really good, it's the best possible card you could find. But against decks like Elves and the Mirror, it can get really awkward really fast. So that's why I've decided to only play one. But Militia Bugler will often give you the choice between having it when it's game breaking or choosing a different card entirely. And Gaddock Teeg. Gaddock Teeg's a big upgrade here because typically before I would have a card like Damping Sphere in my sideboard. But being able to play Gaddock Teeg is still going to help you in the matchups where Damping Sphere was great. KCI, Storm, and Gaddock Teeg is actually even good against Control because it stops all the Wrath and the Terminus. So I think it's even better. And now that I can have a more guaranteed access to it, and it doesn't really matter what turn you play Gaddock Teeg as long as you're not dead yet against these decks, I think it's super, super crucial that you can find it off of Militia Bugler. So those are the reasons that it makes your bad matchups better and your good matchups not any worse, and your sideboard better. Now I'm going to talk about briefly some few talking points that people have had in humans. And I see all these great talking points over on the very great Facebook page, Modern MTG Humans. And it's a group full of a lot of active people, but there's so many opinions that I don't necessarily agree with that I don't want to reply to all of them. So I thought I would just talk about a couple of them. And the first, and honestly the most heinous in my opinion, is that a lot of these lists are playing 1 Plains and 1 Island, and cutting either a Seachrome Coast or a Horizon Canopy. What I don't get is why you're playing an island. So, some have argued that it's to help mitigate the effects of Blood Moon. But if you get Blood Moon, the island is almost never going to help you out anyway. I don't think it matters that at all. I don't think that's a good argument at all. Blood Moon, not a good argument. The only one that I could possibly see is that it makes Path to Exile worse against you because you can ramp again, not just the first time with the Plains. And it makes Field of Ruin worse against you because you can actually go get a second basic land, so they can't just cut you off of lands after they do it twice. But I don't think that's a worthy argument because most of these control decks are Jeskai, and if they're blue-white, if they cut you off a land, it's whatever. Like a 3-mana Stone Rain where it just kills one of your lands and they get to keep a land. It's obviously pretty good sometimes, but I don't think it's worth really worrying about. And what you are losing is the ability to cast your white cards when you cut Seachrome Coast, and the ability to have this incredible flood insurance that is Horizon Canopy. There's a reason it's $1 million. It's one of the best possible lands, and when both the colors matter for you, you really don't want to cut that deck at all, or from the deck at all. Another contention I see is that people want to keep all the Phantasmal images, but from my point of view, what happens is that Phantasmal Image, be it a very, very good card, and often is one of the reasons you can have some of your most explosive draws, it does come with its own awkward side to it. It's very hard to cast, especially if you don't have an Aether Vial or a Noble, or obviously the Seachrome Coast, which some people are cutting. And it's bad in multiples because they could kill your creature and then you get stuck in an awkward position. And Another thing is that people are having some reservations about cutting Reflector Mage, but there's not a lot of decks where Reflector Mage is exactly what you want to be doing. And most of the decks that you will want to be Reflector Maging in, you want to be Militia Buglering in, except for save Infect and Affinity, where the curve out aspect of a Reflector Mage really matters. So I think those two are the safest cuts to add the third and fourth Militia Bugler. And I've seen some people cut Meddling Mage, but it's just so hard for me to do that when I find it to be one of the most important card in some really fringe matchups, and it can really change matchups from being bad to good just because you can make some decks are just cold to it. So I'm not fully sold on that. Another is that some people have been talking about playing Kasali Pride Mage over Reclamation Sage. So I get on the surface that Kasali Pride Mage is just a much better card than Reclamation Sage, especially because it fits our theme, like just attacking with a flyer, getting another Exalted trigger, being a reasonable body. You can name Wizard on Cavern or Unclaimed Territory, and there's quite a few Wizards in our deck, so we won't get mana screwed as often. But what Reclamation Sage does is that it just provides a better body, and they can't bolt it before we try to kill their artifact or whatever. For example, against KCI, they could just bolt it. And maybe there's no KCI out there worth killing it, or there's no card out there worth killing it. So it could get you into a pretty awkward spot. I think it's worthy thinking about because being able to name Wizard is actually such a high upside. But I think it's safer to just play Reclamation Sage, even though it comes with sort of a hard to cast part of it as well. You only have 8 green sources that are natural, other than naming Elf with one of your creature lands. So those are the things that I wanted to talk about 5-color humans and why you should be playing 4 Militia Buglers, and sort of to answer some of the questions that people have often asked. Thank you.